Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new Quilty Box video. Today I'm unboxing my Quilty Box for September 2017. It's put together by Jara Brandveg. So let's check out what she's included in the box and what we're gonna make together this month. So just in case you've never heard of Quilty Box, basically it's a box of fun gear, some fabric and tools, and all of the items are selected by a different designer. So this month's box was put together by Jara Brandveg. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Her website is quiltingintherain.com. So definitely go check out Jara's website. So the first thing we have is our Bundles of Inspiration magazine. This is really cool. This is a new thing Quilty Box is including, and it has lots of information, a quilt pattern, all kinds of articles, and a little sneak peek. So I'm not going to tell you anything about that quite yet. Let's go through the box together instead. So first thing up, we've got this set of marble glass head pens, really beautiful, cheerful pens. And pair of scissors. I love it when scissors are in Quilty Box. I always need new scissors, and these look like they have a nice curved edge here, and they are printed in the bright cheerful fabrics that Jara designed, so that's cool. We have some thread, and this is, I'm not even gonna try and pronounce it. It is Egyptian cotton thread. We've got 500 meters and it's a 42 ply. So that'll be kind of a good thread for piecing. Quite a lot of it there on the spool, 500 meters. We've got a ruler Pal Mini. So this is a ruler organizer. You can use it to stack up your rulers and keep them organized so that they're not floating all over the place. And of course the fabric. I always love, this is my favorite part, going through the fabric and seeing what we get every month. So let's see. These are, let's see here, let me check the card. These are Jara's prints, and it's La Connor for Lycian Fabrics, and this is designed by Jara. So we've got these beautiful strawberries, and that looks like a really cute pink and flowery kind of print. This has a little bit of gold in it almost. It's a kind of shiny, and then this one's the green version. It has a little bit of silver. I really like those two. I like it when there's shiny stuff on fabric. It's always exciting. That's really cool. That's kind of reminding me of picnic baskets. I'm thinking of picnic baskets and maybe a good quilt for the yard for whenever we go on picnics. And the strawberries are making me think that way too. And here's a beautiful teal print and another blue. Ooh, and it's got a little bit more of that glittery gold. Yeah, beautiful. So super exciting. So I'm going to turn off the camera and figure out what we're going to make with these beautiful fabrics this month. So here's what we're making together this month. This is the Sashing Splendor quilt. It's basically a reverse of the way we usually make a quilt. So usually we take the fabrics, the prints, and we put them into the blocks. Well, I decided to change that up. I was really inspired by the idea of making a picnic quilt. And for me, for some reason, that involves long strips of fabric and these cute white squares. So super, super simple. This is a quilt you can easily piece in a day. And the best thing is it's actually pretty big just with the fabrics that we got from our Quilty Box. So let's get started creating the Sashing Splendor quilt together. The first step to this quilt is to cut your pieces out of the fat quarters of fabric. So I took the 8 fat quarters, we starched and pressed them, and then we've cut them down into a 3.5 by 8.5 inch rectangle. So went on ahead and sliced them all up. Now this is going to make a lot more rectangles of fabric than we need, but that's okay. You can always use the scraps for another project. So now what we're going to do is start piecing these together. And it's really nice to have a totally random arrangement so you don't have to overthink it. So I just created a random arrangement, and now I'm going to start stacking them with these 3.5 inch squares. So you just grab a rectangle, place a white square on top just like that, grab another one, keep on going. And it really helps if you can get a nice random arrangement for your fabric so then you don't have to overthink it. You know, this is one of those things that I can kind of start to get stuck on, like, oh, that fabric can't be next to that fabric, you know, something like that. And really, a truly random arrangement, you're going to sometimes end up with the same or similar prints next to one another. That's part of the randomization. You know, sometimes similar things end up next to one another. That's okay. So I would just allow things to flow like that. Don't worry about creating any particular pattern or order. Just, you know, make your stack of fabrics and get them all nicely arranged. Now you'll take them to your machine and piece those together with a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've already done this with these blocks as well. So you're going to do the small blocks to create your cornerstones and your big blocks to create the blocks of your quilt. And the cool thing about this, I think this is really neat, you're going to have now the nice big blocks to be able to play with many different machine quilting designs. You could mark a cool design here in the block using a stencil or something like that. A lot of cool ideas for using this big open space as a canvas for your machine quilting designs. So here you can see, went on ahead and pieced those just randomly to different fabrics. Nice, totally random arrangement. I love that. You know, as long as I don't start nitpicking, it's gonna go really quickly. So now moving forward, all we have to do is simply take your blocks, arrange them in rows of 5 blocks, piece them together, and then we're going to meet back here and learn how to piece our rows of big blocks with our rows of our cornerstone blocks. So I have my 2 rows created and pieced together, and then now I'm going to work to match these seams. So up until this point, the piecing has gone really, really quickly and fast because all you're doing is just simply piecing squares to rectangles or rectangles to squares. So now this is going to slow down just a bit as we match these seams. So what I do is I stack the seams that I'm matching right on top of one another. Then I pinch with my index finger and middle finger and thumb really hard and make sure then that the fabrics are lined up across the top as well. And then I place a pin. We've got these nice new pins with marble heads, and I'm going to just insert that right ahead of that seam. Now, I get a lot of questions about pressing seams open, and a lot of quilters think that it's easier to match seams when they are pressed to one side, and they kind of seem to lock together, you know, because you have one seam pressed to one side and one seam pressed to the other side. And I get that. I totally get that. I used to depend on that too a long time ago. But here's the thing. I feel like matching seams has more to do with fabric preparation, how you actually treat the fabric before you cut it, than it has anything to do with how you're matching seams like this. So I did an experiment with this quilt. I've already pieced together a lot of these rows. I actually did not pin at all on a lot of these as I was piecing them together. And what I did instead was I just simply stacked the seams on top of one another and pressed firmly as I was piecing it. And you know what? Most of my seams, almost actually all of them, matched perfectly, almost as good as they would have if I had bothered to pin every single seam. So I think personally that seam matching has more to do with fabric preparation. And if you bother to take the time to starch and press and wash your fabric and do all that 9 yards, it's going to be so much more stiff and stable, and it's going to come together so much easier. And then it doesn't matter whether you press your seams open or you press your seams to one side, they're going to come together perfectly. And some of this also has to do with fabric cutting. Obviously, if you're cutting fabric inaccurately, it's not going to go together well. You know, if your rectangles are a bit long, it's just not, you're going to end up having to kind of force fit things together. So please keep in mind that quilting is always it's kind of like a skill building, but it's also a leveling process where each step of the process affects the next step. So how I treat the fabric when I first buy it affects the cutting, and how good I am at cutting affects the piecing, and it all exponentially compounds as you create the quilt. So I'm going to leave this bottom section unpinned, And I'm going to show you how I match this without pinning and still get a nice perfect result. Let's take this to the machine and we'll stitch it together. So I'm at the machine and I've set my stitch length down to 1.5 millimeters to produce a nice tight stitch. I have stitched through a scrap charger. It's 2 layers of fabric, just a little scrap. So that way my thread tails are nice and organized and I know I can stitch right onto this, and I'm not going to be pushing any of the fabrics downward, and I'm also not going to end up with a thread snarl, like my bobbin threads get locked up in the bottom of the machine. So that's why I do that. So I'm going to stitch right up to my pen, then slide it out. And now I'm double checking the fabric, because another thing that can happen is your fabric can slip forward so that the 2 layers are not in alignment that way. So I'm pulling back a little bit, making sure that they're stacked just exactly on top of one another. And it's kind of like, if I know that they're ready and stacked together, then I can stitch pretty fast right up to where I know that things are nicely aligned. So a lot of times I will work about 2 inches at a time, and I'm pressing very firmly down on that fingertip. It's not like a light touch here. I am pressing very firmly to keep those fabrics in alignment. And it's almost, the way I press my fingers on the fabric, it's almost as good as a pen. So I'm coming up on a pen here, stitch right up to it. And I'm feeling also, with this hand, I'm feeling the fabrics. I'm seeing if there's any kind of excess fabric feel or pleating. I can feel that underneath, through the 2 layers. So there's a lot of information I'm picking up that's easy to take for granted once you've been doing this for a while. But I am thinking about that, and it's all kind of going into my head at once as I'm feeling the fabrics and they're coming together. So there's a lot going on here than just simply stitching a seam. Another thing that I'm doing is making sure that the edge stays nicely in line with the edge of my patchwork foot. This is a 1/4 inch patchwork foot, which means it's 1/4 inch from the edge of the foot to the needle. You can use a regular presser foot. You want to measure and make sure that you know exactly if you need to move the needle or what you need to line up with. I have found over the years that this is my absolute favorite way to piece. It was actually the first way that I learned how to piece, with this exact foot. With an older Bernina 830, a record 830, I had this exact same foot on it, and that's how I learned how to piece. So I think that it's really important to kind of figure out a system that works and stick with it. So notice that I stitch right up to my pins, because that's the thing that's locking the pieces in place. And then I remove them. I try not to stitch over them. It's really easy to hit it with your needle, and then it makes a really loud sound, and it's kind of scary. And then it also can potentially break the needle in the machine, and it's just not a lot of fun. It also bends the pen, so you have to throw it away. For a lot of reasons, I try and remember to remove them, but I will be honest, I sometimes do hit my pens, and that sometimes happens. It's not the end of the world, so don't panic that you've broken your machine or something if that happens to you. So I hope you can see that this isn't too time-consuming. I'm piecing fairly quickly down this row, and the really nice thing about this quilt is how quickly it comes together. I pieced the entire top. This is the last row of my top. I pieced it all together in one day. It's really a quick quilt, and it's going to showcase these fabrics so nicely. And I think that's wonderful. Sometimes it's nice to change things up, and this particular idea was just a flip of that traditional, like you usually have the pretty fabrics and the blocks and the plain fabrics and the sashing. And this was just, I was just kind of, I wonder what would happen if I flipped that. So it was really fun. Okay, so now I'm gonna work and match without pinning. So what I'm doing here, and I was kind of already starting to do this and not explain what I was doing, so I just caught that. So basically I'm flipping up on that and making sure that those 2 pieces are in exact alignment. And then I press firmly with my fingertips, just as good as pinning, as it goes through the machine. And then I make sure that that's nicely aligned and keep on stitching. Now notice how I've kind of flipped up the fabric here. It's kind of a reminder to myself that I'm not pinning now, and a reminder to myself that I need to stack these together, basically 1 piece at a time. So right now I'm slipping these together, I'm kind of smoothing it out, and I'm going to stitch down to the middle of this rectangle. And these are 8-inch rectangles, so it's about 4 inches from that seam that I'm really going to start worrying about connecting these together. So now again, I flip back on that seam. I make sure that those are in perfect alignment, that they're right on top of one another. I smooth it back and make sure those edges are in perfect alignment too. And now I am pressing, you can see the tip of my finger has gone cold, totally white. I am pressing hard on that. And then another thing that's really helpful is this is my Queen Size Supreme slider. It's a slippery Teflon sheet. It's typically used for free motion quilting, but I set it here to the front of my machine, off the feed dogs, and it just helps to slip and slide those fabrics right up to the foot, right underneath the needle. So you can see how I placed that, and that really makes this easy. So now I've got my needle here, and it's pretty much at that seam. Now I'm going to start thinking about this next seam, and I've got just a little, it's just a little bit less fabric on this one, so I'm just giving it a very gentle tug so those two seams are in perfect alignment. And now I press very firmly with my fingertip. Think of this method as you're using your fingers as pens. So some people have emailed me and said that they just really don't have that. They don't have that sensation in their fingertips, or I know my dad has struggled with arthritis in his fingers, that his fingers would lock if he tried this. So this might not be a technique that works for you. We've talked through this before, and he's mentioned that to me before, so this might be something to try, see if you like it. It's just another tool for your toolbox if it works for you. But pinning is always a good option too. So here's something that can happen. Maybe this piece was ever so slightly stiffer, or maybe it was slightly cut off, but for whatever reason, I'm off ever so slightly here. So this is a situation when I see that happening, and I see that it's going to be slightly off, sometimes I will slide those pieces. Well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to slide those pieces together so they're perfectly matching. And now I can see, you can see that little extra ripple here in that bottom fabric. That's the two easing together. In this case, I go on ahead and grab a pin and I place it to make sure that those two fabrics stay locked together. And then now I just give the fabric a very gentle tug downward, and that's easing the two together as they go right up to that pin. So this is going to be something, if you decide to try piecing without pinning, really it's just being very observant to how everything goes and how everything fits together. And when you start to see things kind of slipping off and out of sync, then you can grab some pens and bring it back into alignment and make sure that it is going to finish up just exactly the way you want it to. So I'm going to finish this off, and then we're going to double check all these seams and see how they came out. So now I'm finger pressing the seam allowance open, and a few tips on this. I was actually teaching Josh how to do this the other day, and there's definitely a feeling thing to this too. There's a lot of information in my fingertips here, and I'll kind of talk you through it as I do it. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just generally opening the fabrics so that way they're spread out. Then I'm feeling and dragging my fingernail down that seam to open it. And it's real easy to open a seam slightly sloppy, so it kind of leans to one side and you still end up with like a little fold of fabric of the seam allowance kind of leaning over a bit. You really want to try and avoid that. You want it to get totally flat. And after teaching Josh, I realized that there's kind of an angle to my fingertips as I'm doing this, and you just kind of have to play with it until you find it. But I'm kind of dragging my fingernail perpendicular to the fabric, and that's opening it up completely. And it was interesting, as I was teaching Josh, I was like, well, you might run into this issue, and I showed it to him, and then right immediately afterwards, he did exactly that. He kind of pressed it open, but it wasn't as open as it could be. Now, I know that sounds picky, certainly, and that's kind of getting into like my nitpicky nature when it comes to seam pressing, but I do think that makes a big deal. Certainly, when it comes to putting these fabrics together, if one is slightly not as open as the rest, that can affect your joins. That can affect how things are lining up and going together. So it's definitely something to watch out for and be observant about. And again, this might be a thing that you run into issues with, fingertips and stuff. Dad can sometimes have problems with this, because of his arthritis. So there are tools like finger pressers and different tools like that that can help as well. Now I know we started using the unpinning process about right here. And so let's check these joins. I just want to show you how this came out. So about right here, we started using just, fingertip pressure and lining things up, and you can see just how nice all of these seams matched all the way down the line. So this is a skill that you can build, and it's a lot of fun to challenge yourself with this. In fact, actually, I would say some of my joins, like this was pinned, and that's not nearly as accurate. That one's not nearly as accurate as some of these others. So please don't go into it thinking that if you press your seams open, you automatically are consigned to pinning every seam. You can learn methods and how to do this without pinning and piecing still very, very quickly. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you learned a lot and enjoyed creating this Sashing Splendor quilt with me. If you'd like to learn more about quilt piecing, please check out my book, How to Piece Perfect Quilts. I include all of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years and how to prepare your fabric properly. And then I also give the reasons why I think this is the reason why you should do it. A lot of times in quilting we'll explain a technique, but we won't explain why or how we got to that idea or why we started doing it that way. And I really kind of back up my techniques a lot in this book and explain everything step by step. So if you'd really like to improve your piecing skills, definitely come and pick up a copy of How to Piece Perfect Quilts. You can find it at leahday.com/perfectpiecing. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you don't miss the next video coming out soon. And if you're interested in Quilty Box and getting a box of fun gear, tools, supplies, and beautiful fabrics, check it out in a link below this video. I love getting Quilty Box every month and challenging myself to create a new quilt pattern in just a few days. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm going to continue doing Quilty Box every month because it's a fun challenge and it gets me designing and writing and piecing new quilts. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, let's go quilt.